Yeah, okay, go ahead, Rami Khouri. The floor is yours.
Goose wants to say hello. Say hello,
Yours
Goose.
and your cats.
Yeah. Come on, Goose. Get out of here. Go. Go. Goose likes to be in the spotlight. There she goes. Goose came with us from Beirut, so she's a little bit whacked out.
Not
Well,
used to having electricity all the time.
yeah. You'd think by now she'd figure out how the world works with it. So thank you for having me again, and thank you all for the amazing work you do. The more I see of the activities of MAPA and your colleagues, the more impressed I am. I think everybody, just as a small editorial comment, as I watch the dynamism of peace action and progressive groups like yourselves and others working in so many different arenas, and I'm involved with some people from South Africa and Lebanon and Indonesia, people around in Malaysia who are involved in an effort to find large-scale support for Palestinian kids in Gaza who need urgent medical treatment for the amputees or injuries or whatever. And as I interact with activists all over the world, the more I find that the power is enormous, but everybody is trying to figure out how to channel the support that exists, the immense support in the world and increasingly in the Western world for a ceasefire, justice in Palestine, peace, returning the hostages and prisoners, etc., and ultimately a permanent peace agreement. There's enormous support for that, but nobody can figure out how to push the people who have the power that allows this genocide to continue, which is essentially the US and one or two Europeans and the Israelis, how to push them to make changes. And so this is a fascinating topic that I hope to explore soon by interviewing people and writing about it. And but how do you translate large scale public opinion support into policy changes? So I've been talking to friends in South Africa and other places that have experienced this. Just my little editorial for the day to thank you for what you're doing and make repeat, as you know already, that what you're doing is part of a global movement that is actually expanding now. So a quick roundup of events. There's so many different things happening in so many different places that it's hard to dig deep into any of them. But essentially, I would make the point that what we have now is moving action taking place in every one of the important fields related to Palestine, Israel, and wider issues in the Middle East and wider issues of American foreign policy. This means internally inside the US, whether in the Congress or in the political system as a whole, in the media, you're seeing some pretty amazing changes. Um, Activism by groups like you and others. Um, it means diplomatic action by people all over the world, not just statements, as has been the case, but people trying to do things like the Hague Group and others who met in Bogota, and the attempts to get a ceasefire achieved, diplomatic action. So there's activities taking place at the UN everywhere. There's action because this situation has reached the level of gravity and moral concern for people all over the world that it's pushed people to push them to work harder to get something done. And still, they haven't figured out how to go over the finish line and get things done, get a ceasefire, etc. So I think an attempt to give you an overview would require that I just touch a little bit on each section. The most clarity is in what's happening on the ground in Gaza, which is very bad as usual. And now this new push by the Israeli government, Netanyahu, to take full direct military control of Gaza. They already occupy and control Gaza, but the military is not everywhere. So there's around 15%, especially in the north, Gaza City area and other places, and Goose is back. Goose, sit down. There's an attempt, a move by the Israeli government now to move into North Gaza and a few other places in the center, and as they say, complete the military job to destroy Hamas. And these kind of cliches that they have been saying for almost 2 years now are actually, they reflect clearly the intent of um, the rulers and the Israeli government and many Israeli people as well who feel the same way. We got to destroy Hamas. We can't have them um, allowed to stay there to do another attack. So that does represent a certain big feeling among the Israelis, but it is very detached from reality, given that Hamas represents a political response to an untenable situation that has gone on for decades and decades and decades. And as such, it's like the civil rights movement in the United States. You can't destroy this. You can't kill the civil rights leaders as people have done over the years and expect the civil rights movement to stop, because the movement, the people, the organizations are an organic response to a situation of oppression and injustice. And that as long as the causes of the injustice are still there, the oppression, people will resist. And this has been clearly shown in many situations all over the Middle East and around the world. But on the ground, the situation actually is worsening, if that's possible. But you have about now 1.9 million people displaced in Gaza, inside Gaza, as the Israelis make this last big move into the Gaza City area. And they're bombing now daily. 60, 70, 80 people are being killed every day, mostly by being bombed in their tents or in their makeshift homes. The last figures are by the UN are about 60,000 killed, or by the Gaza officials, which the UN accepts. About 60,000 have been killed and 144,000 injured. The numbers are much bigger than that because they're not all reported, and not all missing people are alive, obviously. So there's probably closer to 100,000 who've been killed. But the numbers are not the most critical thing, in the sense that they're huge. They're just way beyond anything that's acceptable in any way. But they keep increasing is the important thing. The food and aid, water, medicine situation, essential items for daily life, that situation is extremely critical and remains critical. There's a lot of propaganda. You get it in the US media, you get it in the Israeli media, a lot of propaganda about opening the floodgates of aid and letting more trucks in, etc. There has been a slight increase in the amount of aid that comes in. About 50 to 60 trucks a day on average are allowed in. The minimum needed is around 600 to 700 a day, UN aid trucks. About 50, 60 are allowed in. And the difficult thing, especially now, is that as these trucks are entering Gaza, about 80% of them, according to, again, UN figures and reputable NGOs, about 80% of them don't reach their destination. They're going to certain areas to make sure that all parts of Gaza get a little bit of aid. And they're mostly surrounded by starving kids and young men, and they're assaulted, and people grab the food and take it home. There are also some organized criminal activities, gangs that the Israelis help to promote. They support some of these gangs, and they like to say that Hamas is stealing the food for itself. But the reality is, it's just desperate people who are assaulting these trucks because they can't see a truck full of food going by and not get some of it. So there's no organized way to deliver the food. The humanitarian, whatever they call them, the foundation, has proved to be a death trap for many people. They're still delivering some food items, many of which can't really be used because people don't have water or fuel to cook and things like that. So they are providing a little bit. So I would guess that somewhere around 10%, 10 to 15% of the required material to keep people in Gaza living normally is getting through, a very small amount. And some of it now is being dropped by air, which is extremely dangerous, and a few people have been killed here and there. So any item, any measure you look at is a desperate attempt by the Israelis, often with American support, to make it look like they're trying to make the situation better, while the reality is that it is precisely the Israeli siege which is the cause of the problem, and that's where the relief can come by loosening the siege, allowing more trucks and food to come in on a regular basis, distributed by the UN and NGOs in a more comprehensive way. There's no sign of that happening now, but the pressure is increasing. And most people who follow this situation say that the aid system, they use the term, is in collapse. It's completely collapsing, and it's very haphazard. Some people are allowing, some Israelis measures allow food to come in to private merchants who can sell them, and those are probably linked to some of the gangs that they're in cahoots with. There are 8 international agencies now, groups, NGOs, UN, who are allowed to bring in food, but they mostly are not allowed to bring in the stuff they have waiting. UNICEF said it has 6,000 trucks on the border, and the Israelis are letting in around 60 a day or so. So therefore, malnutrition is spreading, lack of medical care, all the things associated with this situation have been there for months and months, and they're getting worse. And this is clearly the policy of Israel, which is to keep normal life beyond the reach of the people of Gaza, to make normal life impossible, to make them sick, to make them die, to make them desperate to leave. And at the same time, Israel is trying, again, working, consulting with the US closely, unfortunately, is saying, looking at where can we send these people? Netanyahu comes right out and says, we're just trying to implement the Trump plan to vacate Gaza, turn it into a wonderland, and then some of the Palestinians might come back if they want, which is, I mean, it's just extraordinarily obnoxious and criminal and immoral to talk about that, of doing that to people. But this is what is actually happening. And one of the great moral challenges of our time is how we witness these kinds of behavior and not do anything about it beyond making statements. I mean, people try to do something. They demonstrate, they protest, they vote, they do this, but they're not able to change the policies of essentially the US and Israel. They're the 2 key parties. The others are play a role here or there, but even that's evolving a little bit, because one of the other dramatic developments in recent weeks has been the increase in the number of Western countries, mostly the United Kingdom, France, Canada, Australia, 1 or 2 others, who said that they will recognize a Palestinian state formally at the UN meetings in September and October, at the General Assembly meetings. Now, that's a very tricky development. It's good, certainly on paper, to get these countries to recognize the state of Palestine. Already there's about 155 countries in the world who do recognize Palestine, and there's another 40 or 50 who don't yet. But recognition of Palestine is a symbolic political act. It doesn't translate into direct action. It does translate into legal dynamics. So if Palestine is recognized as a state, as an independent state, even though the Israelis control it, it changes the nature of the responsibility of Israel to Palestine when Israel does its attacks and the things it does.
You sit there?
Yeah. So the situation is one in which the political, the cumulative disgust of the world and concern about what's going on in Gaza is pushing some countries, like these ones I mentioned, to say, okay, we're going to recognize a Palestinian state. My problem with this, and I haven't really written on this, but I plan to do something in the coming week, is that this is really a mixed blessing, because at one level it relieves them of the pressure to say, oh, we're going to recognize Palestine, so stop calling us, stop criticizing us. But at another level, if you look at the details, the French, the British, the Canadians, and others have said, we'll recognize the state of Palestine, but Palestine has to do this and this and this and this. It's conditional. It's not real recognition. It's a bargaining chip in a way, to bargain for their own sense of innocence, of redemption, and also to bargain for reducing the terrible situation on the ground by pressuring the Israelis. And they use it as a stick to hit the Israelis. It's not a measure of it's not a moral compass of how these companies feel about Palestine, because if it were, they would have recognized it years ago, certainly months ago during the genocide. So it's a practical, self-serving, mechanical maneuver, which is a bit cynical, and it's also full of caveats, which to me, the most important thing is that these expressions of a willingness to recognize the state of Palestine are the latest form of the colonial manipulation of power that these Western countries are using. And I've always spoken of the current situation as the last anti-colonial struggle in the world, the Zionism being one of the last settler colonial movements that was launched from the Western world in the 1920s, while the rest of the world was decolonizing. The Zionists were colonizing with direct British and then American and other support. So this battle to push back against what Israel is doing and achieve justice for Palestinians is to me the last anti-colonial struggle. And the people who are doing the colonialism, the Israelis, the Americans, the British, the Germans, and others, are also in their way pushing back to maintain the levers of power that they have. So these political moves need to be looked at with much more nuance, and not to just accept them at face value, because they are designed heavily as a public relations move, but they also reveal a lot about the real soul and intent of these countries who say this. And while they say that they're going to do this, they're also still allowing military supplies to go to Israel and things like that. And the one fascinating development is the German government announcing about a week ago that it was going to suspend some arms sales to Israel of arms that could be used against the Palestinians in Gaza. Now, this is fascinating. It is a practical step. If it's implemented, we'll have to see what it is they're stopping. If they're going to stop a few, I don't know, software things or some kind of bullets or something like that, while other forms of oppression by Israel in Palestine are still supported by the West, then these are pretty meaningless. But still, it's a step in the right direction, and I think this is a sign again of mounting pressure on the Western countries that still actively support the Israeli genocide, mounting pressure on them to change their policies, because the whole world is really unhappy with what's going on and unwilling to just sit around and watch it. At the same time, the Israelis are holding talks, they say, with various people, including the United States, about resettling some Palestinians in places like South Sudan and Indonesia and other places. I mean, South Sudan, the situation in Gaza is bad, but so it's also very bad in South Sudan. South Sudan is a mess, unfortunately. But this is what colonialism does. It just takes people and uses them as pieces on a chessboard, moves them around, whatever it wants to do. The U.S. is apparently involved in some of these talks, but it's not clear to what extent. None of this is made public. They've talked of Somalia, they've talked of South Sudan, they've talked of Indonesia and other places, we'll see what comes out of it. But just the fact that the Israelis are still doing this is a sign of they're still trying to desperately get the Palestinians out of Palestine. This has been a focus of Zionism since the 1920s, and it remains a focus of Israel, which is the Zionist state today, to get the Palestinians out of Palestine. And they're not able to do it. They've used this immense military power, which the US has been partnering with them on, immense military power, the most advanced technology, and they're not able to do it. There may be a couple of 100,000 Palestinians have left Palestine because they're in desperate need of medical care or they died. But the vast majority don't want to go. They'd rather stay there and die, which is a terrible thing to say, but this is what human nature is about. It's not about being Palestinian or Israeli or French. It's about human nature. The ceasefire talks have stopped for about a month or so, and now just today it was announced that Hamas sent a senior delegation to Cairo. So clearly there is action behind the scenes to try to get a ceasefire agreement. And the expectation among people who follow these things is this is not going to be one of these hokey three-phase ceasefires like they tried to do back in January, and then the Israelis stopped it after phase one and resumed attacking. This has to be an all-for-all package deal, that all the hostages are released and all the Palestinian prisoners are released, all the fighting is stopped, the Israelis get out of Gaza completely. I mean, they're going to stay around bordering it from the outside, but they'll still have some influence, but they'll be out of Gaza, and the Palestinians will agree as part of the negotiations not to attack the Israelis. So a permanent ceasefire, and this is the best that I think people can hope for now. The ideal is to get that done, exchange the hostages and prisoners, and try to move to the bigger picture challenge, which is a permanent peace agreement between Palestine, Israel, and other Arab states and others. And this, if this happens at the same time that more global powers, including big Western ones, recognize a Palestinian state formally in the coming months, that could set the stage for a serious global mediation effort that takes away the biggest impediment, I believe, to peaceful negotiations beyond the unwillingness of Zionism to live peacefully with Palestinians with equal rights. But the biggest impediment has been that the US has dominated the mediation process, the political mediation, and the US is on Israel's side. It's basically trying to achieve what is good for Israel, not what's right for both sides. The only time that I recall where the US did try to be more even-handed was way back in the Madrid talks after the Gulf War. I can't remember what year that was, in the early 1990s, I think. There was a peace conference in Madrid, and the Palestinians were represented for the first time as part of the Jordanian joint delegation with Jordan, which was fascinating. But that was one of the few times that the US actually tried to address the concerns of Israel and the Palestinians simultaneously. And that was partly because you had a few people in power in the US. It was George Bush the father and James Baker. You had some serious political people who had a little bit more morality than others, maybe, I don't know. But they were pushing for this, and they understood that it had to be done. So there might be another move to go for a global, permanent Arab-Israeli full peace agreement. But in the meantime, working against this, and I'll finish with this and two more. This is another point. In the meantime, you've got U.S. congressional delegations now from both parties. One of them led by the House Speaker Mike Johnson, visiting Israel and going to visit settlements and making it clear that this is the land that God gave to Israel, belongs to Israel. And you had Mike Huckabee, the American ambassador to Israel, who is a Christian fundamentalist zealot, He's been making ridiculous statements. So there is still a core of political officials in Washington that is vehemently on the side of Israel, but this core is getting smaller and smaller over time. And you're getting more and more senators and congressmen and women voting for balanced resolutions, ceasefires, suspending arms sales to Israel. So the process of political policy change that I mentioned at the beginning, that is, it takes time and a lot of work to figure out how do you change the policies of a government. It's not that difficult to protest, to express your anger in different ways, in voting, marching, letters, whatever. But how do you force the government to change its policy? And we saw in Vietnam and other places, it takes a long time to get that done. So we're seeing glimpses of that process, maybe in its very early stages, where you get now about half the Democrats in the Senate are voting for a ceasefire resolution and some suspension of arms sales to Israel. So this is really new stuff, which is and continues to grow. This is the important thing, and not just Bernie Sanders by himself, or it's other people are joining, and this is something to keep our eye on. And then the last thing I'd mention is that globally, you're still seeing signs around the world of more support, practical attempts to support the Palestinians, get a ceasefire, and the genocide. The Hague Group that was created months ago has met again. They just met in Bogota. They have another meeting coming up in December. They're trying to come up with this is a group of countries that are not gigantic powers, but they're important players, and they're trying to come up with a joint policy on how to practically support the Palestinians through legal action, through boycotts, etc. They're still meeting and coming up with ideas and practical proposals. That's to me is an important sign. So keep your eye on the Hague Group. And finally, it was announced a few days ago, there's going to be another big flotilla of ships to go into Gaza to try to get to Gaza with food aid. But they're talking now of 30 or 40 boats together moving towards Israel. The Israelis, of course, will not allow this to happen, and they don't have any hesitation to shoot and maybe sink one or two of the small boats or whatever. They've done it before. They've killed people in flotillas. But if you get 30 or 40 or 50 boats at once, and you get major Western powers supporting them, saying they're bringing food aid, they must be allowed to deliver the aid. I wouldn't be surprised if the Israelis were forced by the Europeans and Americans, especially those Europeans who are critical for Israel's resupplying of its military materials and other things. We might see some hint of movement if on this flotilla when it happens. It's supposed to happen, I think, in September or maybe October. I can't remember. Jeff probably knows. But these are signs. All of these are signs of change that sorry, one last sign. The media in the United States, the mainstream media, has started to do things that I've never seen in my 60 years of watching the American media since the late 1960s. On CNN and CBS and these mainstream shows, I'm not talking about the progressive, independent, lefty stations and websites. I'm talking of mainstream American television, which of course doesn't reach as many people as it used to because it's lacked credibility. But when you get hosts of talk shows on, say, CNN or ABC or CBS, and they have people who are speaking for Israel and for Palestine, and the Israeli pro-Israel group is making outrageous statements that are mostly lies. The host stops them and says, "Look, please stop giving us the Israeli talking points. Let's talk about the facts on the ground in Gaza. Why is this hospital not allowed to receive emergency medical care for children who are dying and malnourished? This is unprecedented action by mainstream people in the American media. It's not all the media, but it is their individuals, and this doesn't happen haphazardly. The owners, the management of these companies realize that this is happening. And my explanation is that the mainstream media managers and owners are realizing what many politicians realized, which is that the American public as a whole, especially the people under the age of 40, have completely shifted to a more even-handed position on Palestine and Israel. They want justice for both. They don't want to support a genocide. They don't want to be complicit in a genocide. When the history of this genocide is done, like the history of the concentration camps and the Holocaust in Europe was done, the Americans, especially younger Americans, don't want to be on the side of the evildoers, the bad guys. And therefore, the media managers realize that they're losing huge numbers of their audiences. They're just not tuning in anymore. And this could be the first sign of their attempt to be more even-handed. So they're still giving the Israeli view, but they're also now giving the Palestinian view. And maybe they will give less Israeli propaganda. They'll let pro-Israel people speak, but factually, and therefore the audience will get a more accurate picture of what's going on. So I'll stop with that. There's always things to talk about, but these strike me as important developments to keep our eyes on as we watch this fascinating dynamic of what we've seen in the last 2 years has been that the law, human morality, and military power have all changed in a bad way and combined in a bad way. The law has been degraded, morality has been put in the back pocket, and military power has come to the foreground. Those three are now renegotiating a new relationship amongst each other, law, morality, and power. And this is going to be determined by the ability of groups like yourselves and others to keep pushing the cause of justice for all. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Rami. That's a great report, a great overview. I'm going to take the first question, if I may, and others who want to ask a
You mind if
question,
I
go
add
ahead.
something, Cole?
Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah.
You can go ahead.
Thanks, Rami. And you asked the key question right at the beginning. I mean, how do we translate the change in worldwide opinion into action? And I just want to encourage people. Of course, we've won the battle of ideas on this question, worldwide and in the U.S. The problem is that our political systems are very unresponsive and undemocratic in reflecting what people want. But I would just encourage people to remember the famous quote attributed to Ernest Hemingway that things change slowly, 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 and then all of a sudden. And that's kind of what happened with apartheid in South Africa, for example. And just in terms of, you mentioned the congressional trips to Israel, the AIPAC-sponsored trips to Israel that are going on now, or just finishing. And it's kind of emblematic that the Republicans were all over social media, trumpeting, the visit to Israel and posed for a picture with Netanyahu, while the Democrats who went were kind of acting as though they were in the witness protection program. Very little on social media and no picture of them posing with Netanyahu, as far as I could find. So things are changing. It's just going to take a lot more of what we're trying to do to make it decisive in the area of policy. But I think the trajectory is irreversible at this point. And it's just a matter of time and hard work on our part. So I just want to encourage people. It seems like we work and work and work, nothing happens, but it is happening. And someday we'll see it happen quickly.
Oh, for sure, it's happening. I mean, these. I'm going to, in the next week or 10 days, if I can find the time, I'm going to write a more systematic article that captures all of these things point by point because there's so many of them, and you can easily get lost. And even though I make notes when I make these presentations, but I keep thinking of things and adding to them. But I want to do it systematically, and I hope that'll help a lot of people understand that, yes, these are not just significant changes, they're historic changes. They overturn a century of traditional American political skewed political decision making. A whole century about. So thank you for having me. Good luck, and I look forward to meeting you again in person or online soon.
So before you go, Rami, I do want to pose a question.
Oh, yes.
I'd like to believe this is a historic change, but uh, the mainstream Israel lobby, the Democrats, the New York Times, and so on are putting out a new line that Netanyahu is the problem, but Hamas is still a huge problem. And Israel is going too far. We have to get humanitarian aid in, but we're going to still focus on destroying Hamas. So that's what they're putting out. And my question is, does this have any traction? Are they going to be able to restabilize, for example, the congressional Democrats and the media on this new line, or maybe not
I
so
don't
new,
think
but newly prominent line?
I don't think so. I think this kind of, the Israelis are very good at this. They change the topic and they point, somebody is like Hitler or somebody is like Genghis Khan, or, they compare, or ISIS, and they make these terrible comparisons and say, these people are coming for us. And so this catches people's attention very briefly. But what you're also seeing is the media more and more saying, well, he said this, but it's not really true. Like they're talking about Trump and the numbers he keeps putting out there. They say the president said this, but the facts are not like that. They're the opposite. The number of the crime in Washington D.C. is the latest thing I heard today. So I think Hamas is getting more sophisticated at engaging with the global media. The Hamas's position is actually, in terms of its political ideology, they're in a strong position. I co-edited a book on Hamas called Understanding Hamas and Why That Matters. We interviewed 5 top scholars on Hamas who know it intimately, and they gave us their explanation. And one of the things I learned with other interviews is that Hamas has made about 15 specific overtures to Israel, and once directly to George Bush in a letter saying we are prepared to coexist in peace with Israel. So they're not trying to destroy Israel. They were 25, 30 years ago, of course, but they're not trying to destroy Israel. They're trying to end the Israeli subjugation of the Palestinians and achieve Palestinian self-determination and statehood. And they've clarified this many, many times, and they continue to clarify now, but they have to be more sophisticated at presenting their views. The thing is what the Israelis are trying to do is to pull them into the same kind of trap that they got Arafat in with the Oslo process. We'll talk to you. If you just recognize us first, we'll talk to you. So Arafat fell for that. He recognized them and got nothing in return. So the Hamas people very clearly have said this many times. We're not going to play those games. We don't do that. They're a resistance movement, and they will resist, and their position is clear. And now, unlike 30 years ago, now their position will accept coexistence with the Jewish majority state of Israel. They didn't accept that before, but they accept it now. In fact, all the Arabs didn't accept Israel until 20 years ago or so, the Arab Peace Plan, when they accepted Israel. So I think the tactics that Netanyahu will use and others use are not very effective. They tried to do this with the Gaza food aid being stolen by Hamas until about 10 different reputable international NGOs and international organizations came out with reports, including Israeli ones, saying, no, this isn't true. They're not stealing. There's a few gangs in Gaza who the Israelis support who have stolen some food, but it's not. The ability to contradict the lies of Israel and clarify that they're lies is now much more active on the scene, and this is a good sign.
Great. Thank you so much, Ron. Appreciate it very much.
All right. Thank you all.
Okay, let's turn to our agenda. We're going to talk about, let me switch the Zoom 1 second here.